6:47 a.m. The metallic smell of reheated coffee mingled with the synthetic perfume of the Denver airport carpet. I held the small titanium Montrose pen, a gift from my father before he died. "Sign only what honors you," he used to say. That pen would be the thread conductor of my ruin, and later, of my revenge. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm 42 years old, born in Des Moines, Iowa, and for the past 6 months I've been living in Austin, Texas, where the heat and concrete seem to compete to see who melted first. I was the director of operations at Horizon Dynamics, a company that boasted of redefining global energy infrastructure. In practice, we were an empire of egos, executives in custom suits and souls mortgaged to 7-figure annual bonuses. That morning, I was boarding Delta Flight 1847 to New York to present the final report on our contract with Fulton Utilities, a $3.6 million deal. I had dedicated 14 months to the project, 118 flights, 73 nights in cheap hotels, and countless hours of lost sleep reviewing spreadsheets that even my assistant no longer understood. As the plane began taxiing, I looked out the window and saw the reflection of the Montrose pen in my hand. It had a small silver scratch on the cap, for when I dropped it on the company headquarters floor after an all-night audit. It looked like a scar, and like every scar, it carried a reminder. Everything that shines has already survived something. As the plane gained altitude, I felt my cell phone vibrate in the inside pocket of my blazer. An email from Gregory Vance, the executive vice president of Horizon. Subject: Status Update, HR Transition. I opened the email without imagining that bureaucratic title was in fact the cold sentence of my exile. Ethan, considering the recent strategic restructurings and the consolidation of the executive team, your position has been discontinued, effective immediately. HR will send the terms of your termination and transition package. We appreciate your contribution and wish you future success. Gregory Vance, VP, Horizon Dynamics. For a few seconds, I remained motionless. The engine noise seemed to turn into a distant hum. Position discontinued? By email? During a flight? I looked around. Strangers. Plastic trays. The murmur of a flight attendant offering orange juice. Was this how a 19-year career ended? My first impulse was to laugh. Not that light laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes when the pain is so absurd that the body prefers to deceive itself. Me, Ethan Caldwell, who built Horizon's efficiency model, now being deleted like an unwanted attachment. I picked up the Montrose pen and twirled it between my fingers. I remembered Gregory, the arrogant VP with whom I had argued weeks before about the environmental impact reports. He wanted to omit data. I refused. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just a restructuring, it was punishment. But there was something that Gregory Vance and no one else knew. Among the clauses of my retention contract, drafted 3 years ago, there was a line that I myself had suggested, half as a legal joke, half as a silent self-defense. An Executive Data Preservation Protocol, internal code name, Section 12G. I never imagined I'd need it, until now. As the plane crossed the clouds, I opened my laptop, still connected to the onboard Wi-Fi, and accessed Horizon's internal server. Typing quickly, I confirmed what I feared. My account was already blocked. But Section 12G was in another domain, encrypted and anonymous. A digital life insurance that could only be activated by whoever had the original physical signature of the contract, the one I signed with the Montrose pen. Turbulence shook the plastic cup beside me. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Okay, Gregory, you hit send. Now it's my turn to hit activate. The plane continued toward New York, and I, still at 36,000 feet, began planning the fall of someone who never believed I could fly higher. When I joined Horizon Dynamics in 2006, the company was a jumble of promises and colorful PowerPoints. I was 23 at the time, Fresh out of industrial engineering with a hard-earned degree from the University of Iowa and an almost childlike faith in corporate meritocracy, I thought all it took was hard work, being right, and the world would open doors. 19 years later, I still believed in hard work, but I had learned that the corporate world doesn't open doors, it locks them and watches who can break them down with elegance.
In the first 10 years, I was the type of invisible employee who keeps projects breathing. I was the man who arrived at 6, left at midnight, and never appeared in the photos of internal campaigns. While others vied for spotlights in meetings, I adjusted spreadsheets that saved contracts from bankruptcy. Once, in 2013, the CFO himself called me the ghost who saves others' bonuses. I thought it was funny. Today, I realize how prophetic it was. It was only in 2019 that my name began circulating in the executive corridors. I was promoted to Director of Operations, responsible for overseeing infrastructure contracts in Texas, Colorado, and Louisiana. 32 simultaneous projects. Tight margins. Corrupt politicians, disgruntled unions, impossible deadlines, and me. In the middle of it all, keeping the machine alive. It was in this scenario that I met Gregory Vance. Gregory was the typical executive molded by an elite MBA. Deep voice, Italian suits, and an almost religious conviction that charisma substitutes for competence. Son of a former California senator, he considered himself a visionary. In practice, he was an actor seeking an audience. In our first meeting, he told me, "Ethan, the problem with people like you is that you work too much and talk too little. No one respects silence in a boardroom." I stayed silent, and he, paradoxically, took that as respect. The other piece of the game was Megan Hallbrook, HR director. Too young for the position and too old to pretend to be naive. Megan had that type of smile that seems empathy, but carries calculation. She always carried a tablet in hand, and the phrase, "that's confidential," ready on her tongue. She and Gregory formed the type of toxic alliance that thrives at the top. Him, the ego, her, the mechanism. I endured it all. The passive-aggressive emails, the stolen credits, the meetings where my work was presented under someone else's name. All of that because I believed that in some way, Horizon could still be the place where I would do something worthwhile. But the game changed in early 2024 when I took over the Fulton Utilities contract, a $3.6 million project involving upgrades to electrical substations and installation of smart sensors throughout the county system. A contract that could position Horizon as a reference in clean energy. Of course, Gregory wanted to turn the project into a political springboard, and Megan would clean up the irregularities. I saw it all happening, and like a fool, I believed that exposing the numbers was enough. In the preliminary presentation, I showed that Horizon was manipulating environmental indicators. Gregory pretended not to hear. Megan said that would be resolved internally. The following week, my access to the financial system was limited for protocol reasons. The silence began to suffocate me. It was like watching a fire and having to smile for the cameras while the flames consume everything. It was then that on a March night, reviewing my own contracts, I found Section 12G, a clause I had suggested in 2021 when we reviewed the executive retention policy. The idea was simple. In case of improper termination, any data or correspondence related to the executive's performance would be preserved in a mirrored copy, with independent audit. No one paid attention, but it was approved. And now, 3 years later, that obscure line was the only link between my ruin and my revenge. I just didn't know it yet. That Gregory and Megan had plans to cut me off the map before I could even remember it. And when the termination email arrived, in mid-flight,
I realized the blow had been calculated with surgical precision. But unlike them, I always had a good memory.
And contracts, especially the poorly read ones, are the art of written remembrance. The meeting was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. New York time. I still felt the nausea from the flight and the weight of a poorly slept night. As soon as I arrived at the hotel, my cell phone was buzzing incessantly with HR notifications. The subject was the same: termination protocol. At 9:29, I joined the video call. On the screen, 3 faces: Gregory Vance, with the smile of someone who had already won; Megan Holbrook, impassive as a sculpture; and Eric Nolan, the legal advisor, probably summoned only to give a veneer of legitimacy to the execution. Gregory began the rehearsed speech in a neutral voice. "Ethan, we value your contribution, but the company is restructuring its operational divisions. This move is necessary to align resources and optimize global performance. Translation: you're disposable." I tried to stay calm. Restructuring? I'm the only director who delivered the Fulton project on budget. This isn't restructuring, it's retaliation. Megan intervened, feigning empathy. "Ethan, I understand this is difficult, but it's a collegial decision. HR will take care of everything. You'll receive a generous transition package." Generous. The word sounded like poison. The package she referred to amounted to $120,000 in compensation, a paltry sum compared to the $3.6 million performance bonus I had accrued, and which, due to administrative conditions, would not be paid. Gregory adjusted his suit and said, "You need to understand, Ethan, that the bonus value is tied to remaining until the end of the fiscal year. Since your position was discontinued before that, it doesn't apply." Translating, they fired me 2 weeks before the payment precisely to cut me out of the bonus. I took a deep breath. The anger came like a silent wave. I looked to the side. The Montrose pen was on the hotel desk, among papers and notes. The lamplight reflected on the silver scratch on the cap. It was as if it were watching me, reminding me of who I was and what I could still do. I pretended to agree. "Understood. I just like everything in writing, as always." Gregory nodded. Without understanding, he had just handed me the final piece. Megan sent the email in real time. "Termination agreement. Ethan Caldwell." I downloaded the document, scrolled to the end, and found my name, spelled wrong. Ethan Cadwell, without the L. I picked up the pen, removed the cap, and let the tip slide over the notepad paper. A single sentence, written in dark blue ink. They misspelled the name. I folded the paper and put it in the Fulton Project folder. That night it rained in Manhattan, and I knew that the moment the rain stopped, Horizon Dynamics would begin to evaporate from the inside out. The next morning, the sun entered through the gaps in the hotel curtain like a golden blade. The world seemed the same, but something in me had changed. I was no longer the employee fired by email. I was the silent architect of a systemic failure that no one had noticed yet. I opened the contract again. The letters seemed cold, mechanical, but there, hidden among paragraphs and references, was Section 12G. I myself had drafted the outline 3 years earlier, when Megan still trusted me enough to let me review internal policies. The text read, "In case of termination not provided for in the performance review conditions, all files, metrics, and correspondence related to the executive shall be preserved under independent audit protocol, in a mirrored environment, until final legal validation." In other words, if my termination hadn't gone through a formal performance evaluation, all Fulton project data, including email records, spreadsheets, and server logs, would be automatically locked under technical custody. And more,
Any attempt to delete, move, or alter those files would be recorded in real time and sent to an external directory. A directory that, out of pure stubbornness on my part, I had configured on the old Northbridge Analytics test server, a company that no longer existed. Horizon Dynamics unknowingly had just locked its own vault and handed me the key. I began making calculations. The $3.6 million bonus was tied to the success of the Fulton contract, and the contract could only be validated when all environmental reports were released for public audit. But now, by force of Section 12G, the data was frozen, and without it, the contract couldn't be closed.
A bureaucratic error, common but fatal. I signed digitally, with the calm of someone waiting for the tide to turn. They ended the call with platitudes. "Thank you for everything, Ethan. We wish you success in your next steps." And the screen went black. I stayed there, motionless, hearing only the sound of the air conditioning. The room clock read 10:14. I picked up the Montrose pen and gripped it tightly. It was almost comical. 19 years of loyalty ending in a click and a typo. I opened the contract on the screen again. I analyzed every line, every term. And that's when I realized that spelling error legally invalidated the automatic execution of all subsequent clauses, including the bonus block and the waiver of access to data. They had committed the capital sin of power, haste. I saved the file in 3 copies, one in the cloud, another on a flash drive, and the third on the encrypted Section 12G server. Revenge, I realized, wouldn't start with screams or lawsuits. It would start with technical silence. Meanwhile, I turned on the TV to drown out the sound of thoughts. A corporate commercial was playing, with a deep voice saying, "In a world that values those who speak loud, power belongs to those who know when to remain silent." I smiled. Almost ironic. If you're reading this story now, remember that. The true power is in what you learn by observing, not reacting. And if you want to understand how to turn injustice into advantage, it might be worth sticking around. Subscribe. Sometimes the next chapter is exactly where the fall ends.
Without closure, there was no way to release the funds. And without funds, Horizon would face a contractual compliance breach with Fulton Utilities, subject to fines and public sanctions. Gregory Vance, in his haste to get rid of me, had just thrown the company into a legal labyrinth, and I, the invisible man, was the only one with the escape map. I picked up the phone and called an old acquaintance, Jonathan Reese, a lawyer specializing in corporate contracts. In the 2000s, Jonathan and I had worked together on an infrastructure project in Arizona. He was the type of man who knew all the loopholes in the law and all the people who could fill them. "Ethan Caldwell, long time no see. I heard rumors about your corporate transition." "Rumors, correct," I replied. "But I think I've found a line that can turn rumors into an earthquake." I explained Section 12G. Jonathan laughed, that half-disbelieving laugh of someone realizing something big is about to happen. "You basically created a self-executing legal vault. And if the termination was done without performance review, as it seems to have been, the clause is valid. You have a weapon, my friend, a weapon that fires itself." "And if I want to aim it back at the source?" "Then you'll need to prove they tried to exclude you from the server. That triggers the custody. The rest, the company destroys itself." I took notes, and as Jonathan sent me a model data preservation notice, I realized the most delicious detail of the irony. To annul Section 12G, Gregory would have to formally admit that my termination was irregular, and that, by contract, would automatically reactivate my bonus. It was a perfect legal trap, created by me, ignored by them.
In the afternoon, I sat in the hotel lobby with my laptop and initiated a remote trace on Horizon's server. I still had limited access to the external network, enough to detect movements. In a few minutes, logs appeared with deletion attempts. User mhalbrook.hr@Horizon. Time 2:12 p.m. Megan Halbrook was deleting my emails. And with every key she pressed, the system fired an automatic alert to the Northbridge Analytics mirrored server, recording everything. It was like watching someone digging their own grave, in real time. I sent the preliminary report to Jonathan. He replied in less than 10 minutes. "Ethan, you just created evidence of audit obstruction. That's federal. And now, my dear, you have not only a bonus, but a bomb." I looked out the window. The fine rain turned the city lights into distorted reflections. I picked up the Montrose pen and twirled it between my fingers. The same pen that had signed my contract would now sign my counterattack. "They wanted to delete me," I murmured, "but they forgot that even corporate trash needs a backup." The next step was simple and lethal. Send a public legal notice demanding data preservation, under penalty of litigation and fines. But I wanted more than justice. I wanted exposure. And the best place for a warning like that would be where the entire market could see. The plan was born in 2 quick and cold conversations, one by phone with Jonathan Reese at 3:03 p.m. and another encrypted message at 4:27 p.m. with a trusted technician I had met on a 2017 implementation, Marcus Shaw, forensic systems engineer. 3 men, 1 pen, and a contract. Simple on the surface, lethal in the details. Jonathan dictated the legal script. First, issue a data preservation notice, NPD, based on Section 12G. Second, immediately request a preliminary injunction hearing to determine custody of the mirrored files. Third, attach to the request the technical logs proving obstruction attempt, exactly what the Northbridge server had recorded. Without that technical proof, the court would see only 2 versions, mine and theirs. With the proof, it would see documented obstruction. Marcus would handle the part I didn't master, turning raw logs into forensic package immune to contestation. He needed 3 things: integrity hash SHA-256 for each preserved file, chronological chain of custody, and timestamp signed by an external time authority, TSA, to ensure no one could claim later alteration. In simple terms, turn bytes into evidence a judge would accept without blinking. Meanwhile, I had to build the theatrical component. The law provided the support, but public exposure would make Horizon feel the blow in the chest. Jonathan suggested sending the NPD with copies to 3 strategic recipients: the Fulton Utilities Board, the contractual external auditor, firm Klein & Partners, and the State Compliance Committee. Each would represent a public mirror. If Horizon tried to erase or hide, it wouldn't be just an internal failure. It would be a public scandal, affecting contracts, reputation, and most importantly, the flow of the $3.6 million. I worked the logistics as I always did: spreadsheets, deadlines, responsibilities. I set up a schedule with short and surgical times. 4:45 p.m., Marcus collects logs and generates initial hashes. 5:10 p.m., Jonathan prepares initial petition and legal attachments. 5:30 p.m., send NPD to listed recipients, schedule preliminary injunction hearing for 48 hours. 6 p.m., controlled publication of executive summary to sector journalists if Horizon refuses preservation. When Marcus sent me the first package, I felt my stomach tighten. The files came with stamps, among them emails with clear trails, Each entry was a small nail in the coffin of the narrative Gregory and Megan tried to forge. Jonathan worked the petition with watchmaker precision. In the document, he described Section 12G, listed the recorded deletion attempt, and requested preliminary injunction based on risk of irreparable loss of evidence and contractual violation. He also requested a coercive measure, daily fine of $25,000 for any attempt to destroy or conceal files. There was an extra element, a contractual acceleration clause that Jonathan found in Appendix B of the Fulton Agreement. Drafted for litigation cases that prevented project completion, if contested, the clause allowed withholding 30% of payments until resolution. It was small, but enough to put Horizon in immediate apprehension. At 5:30 p.m., I sent the NPD. I did it with the calm of someone signing a consolidated spreadsheet. I copied Greg Vance, copied Megan, copied the board president. In attachment, I was surgical: forensic summary, injunction request, and custody instructions. The notice came with warning: response expected within 4 hours. Absence of response will be interpreted as concealment attempt. Minutes later, the responses came. First, a laconic email from Eric Nolan asking for time, then nothing from Gregory, but Megan replied with, "We are analyzing internally." False. It was the standard response from someone trying to buy time while erasing trails. While Jonathan prepared the petition for filing, I called a journalist specializing in energy, someone I had helped years before with public data. I didn't convince him to publish. I just said something was happening and I could share documents as soon as the injunction was requested. It was bait, and I needed it to shine enough so that, if Horizon reacted badly, the press would already be ready. Marcus did the rest. He created a full snapshot of the North Bridge mirrored server, with chain of custody logs, and sent everything to a digital vault with private key. He called me. "Ethan, the hashes match. No one touched the file since the deletion attempt. If they try to say it was you, the stamps disprove it." Perfect. Activate the petition. At 6:42 p.m., Jonathan filed the petition in the competent district court. The automatic message confirmed receipt. Protocol S, D 2025-8941. It was official. It was public. It was the first stone of my revenge. I sat and looked at the Montrose pen. The security of my right was there, and, ironically, out of reach of those who had tried to annul me. The gear was engaged. All that remained was to wait for their reaction and discover if Gregory had the courage to admit the irregularity or if he would choose denial until collapse. Their next move would set the tone of the confrontation: confession and silent agreement, or denial and full exposure. Which one do you think they'll choose? The day after the petition, the city seemed more attentive. Maybe it was just my amplified anxiety. Maybe the financial center really was more sensitive to any noise. What I knew precisely was the time, 9:17 a.m. That's when the first sign appeared, not in a cold email, but in something much more visible. I received a call from Jonathan at 9:17. His voice, deep and curt, said, "They're not going to yield without public pressure. The hearing is set for tomorrow, but we have a window to force a move. Ready?" "Ready," I replied. We decided the warning should be simultaneously technical and spectacular, because a complaint without spectacle can be muffled. Technical without spectacle can be ignored. We needed the market, Fulton Utilities, and the Compliance Committee to see they're not just a lawsuit, but a symptom. Marcus suggested something that sounded almost theatrical: an electronic banner on the Horizon headquarters information panel synchronized with the public legal notice and an internal access block that would interrupt automatic reports to critical clients. For a few minutes, enough for the alert to spread. At 1:45 p.m., Marcus executed the first part, a script that took over the Horizon facade's digital panel feed and replaced, for exactly 9 minutes, the institutional message with something that seemed extracted from a legal thriller. Notice: preservation order active. Evidence of data obstruction under investigation. Contact legal@northbridge-archive.com. The letters were white on a fluorescent orange background, impossible not to notice. Pedestrians on the sidewalk stopped, drivers looked, delivery drones swerved. At the same time, I sent the NPD copy to the external recipients with an attachment containing Marcus's technical summary and the injunction request. Jonathan filed a notice to the court requesting an emergency hearing. Protocols worked. The message was replicated in news monitoring systems, and in less than 10 minutes, a sector feed captured the text. But what really churned Greg Vance's stomach was the second step. For 8 minutes, automatic reports that Horizon sent daily to Fulton Utilities were replaced by a coded notice, a digital preservation certificate signed by Marcus and sealed by the Northbridge Vault. There was no data alteration. There was only the imposition of technical custody. For Fulton, that was a clear signal. The files were under external review. The notice reached the Fulton board in protocol format. They reacted with immediate concern. At 2:05 p.m., Klein and Partners, the independent auditor, sent a message requesting explanations. The stock exchange, which is usually slow to react to domestic things, had a small attention oscillation in sector systems. Analysts began sending private alerts about compliance risk for Horizon. At headquarters, the corridors that once breathed orders turned into gasps of confusion. Through recordings that reached me via discrete channels, I saw employees running between desks. I saw Megan standing, fingers trembling, demanding explanations from Eric. Gregory, for the first time in months, seemed disconcerted. The facade panel returned to normal at the end of the programmed time, but the seed was planted. Thousands of eyes had seen the word obstruction. Meanwhile, sector journalists began receiving the material I would release if Horizon refused preservation. Jonathan had prepared a technical release, not sensationalist, explaining the legal core, Section 12G, deletion attempt, and the requested preliminary injunction. It was the translation of fact into the language the market understands. I didn't want tabloid headlines. I wanted the market to calculate risk, for clients and partners to reassess their exposure. In a few hours, institutional investors asked tough questions to Horizon's risk area. One of the largest funds in the sector sent a writ requesting emergency meetings. Reputation, which takes years to build, proved fragile as glass under a sure hammer. By the end of the day, the board president sent an internal memo requesting calm and announcing an internal audit, an obvious attempt to control damage. But the attitude sounded like automatic defense. I could smell the metallic scent of corporate anxiety in the air. I observed everything with the serenity of someone who understands that the violence of a public mechanism is not physical, but reputational. The Montrose pen was beside my laptop, its surface reflecting urban lights. In the silence of that moment, I realized we had succeeded. We transformed a technical clause into a spectacle of accountability. Now all that remained was to see how Gregory would react. Would he admit irregularity, trying an agreement with controlled damage, or resist, risking full exposure?
The hearing was scheduled for 24 hours later. The court would see if the technical had sufficient legal validity. The market had already judged. The question that remained, however, was less legal and more human. What price would a man who lives by image and power pay when his image began to crack? And you, if you were in his place, how would you choose? The hearing was scheduled for 8:30 a.m. at Travis County District Court. The cold air of the lobby seemed to vibrate with murmurs from lawyers and journalists. Jonathan was by my side, serene, black leather folders in hand. I carried only the Montrose pen, that which now weighed like a trophy and a blade. On the other side of the room, Gregory Vance and Megan Hallbrook waited with tense faces. He tried to disguise fear with boredom. She hid behind a protocol smile. The judge entered at 8:34. The hearing began at 8:36. Jonathan went straight,
presented Section 12G, showed the record of the deletion attempt made by Megan, displayed Marcus's forensic hash, and protocol hashtag D20258941. Every number, every digital signature, every timestamp was a stone cementing the edifice of my truth. Gregory tried to keep his chin up, but the involuntary hand movements betrayed panic. The judge asked, "Does Horizon Dynamics confirm having performed data deletions after the preservation notice?" Silence. Megan tried to speak, but Gregory interrupted her with a gesture. "Your Honor, there was internal confusion, no intentional act of obstruction." Jonathan responded with scalpel precision. "Your Honor, that internal confusion was generated 3 hours after the plaintiff's irregular termination, in the midst of the environmental review process, and after direct communication with VP Vance. Here are the email records and server logs that prove this." The judge tilted his head. "Mr. Vance, do you confirm authorizing this deletion?" Gregory hesitated. "No, I don't remember authorizing it directly." Jonathan raised a printed sheet, an email digitally signed by Gregory, dated September 14, instructing Megan to clean the operational environment before delivery. The judge looked, motionless, for 3 long seconds. "Mr. Vance, that is direct authorization." The silence that followed was dense enough to cut. The sound of stenographer keyboards seemed like hammer blows. Megan looked away. Gregory looked at me, and I realized for the first time a genuine flash of desperation. I stood slowly, voice firm. "Your Honor, I was fired by email during a flight. I was treated as redundant after 19 years of service. But contracts have memory, and truth, when signed, survives even bad faith. All I ask is compliance with what we wrote together." Jonathan placed the Montrose pen on the hearing table. "This is the pen that signed the original contract, and this signature contains the same stroke as in Section 12G. There is only one person who could activate it, Mr. Caldwell." The judge adjusted his glasses, observed the pen, and said, calmly, "The clause is valid. The obstruction attempt is proven, and consequently, the irregular termination is null. The retention bonus remains the right of the plaintiff. Additionally, I order a fine of $500,000 for violation of data preservation protocol." Gregory closed his eyes. Megan lowered her head. Jonathan just took a deep breath, while I remained quiet. Silence is the most elegant revenge.
After the hearing, in the corridor, Gregory intercepted me. The tone was no longer arrogant. It was of someone trying to regain dignity. "Ethan, there was no need to expose the company like this. You won. You don't need to destroy." I looked at him, unhurried. "I don't destroy, Gregory. I just reveal. Horizon destroyed itself when it thought no one was watching." He tried one last argument. "You don't understand corporate games." I smiled. "I understand perfectly. I just decided to change the rules." That was the last time I saw him. Megan resigned 3 days later. Gregory's name disappeared from the Horizon website a week later. The company issued a generic statement, "Strategic changes in leadership." But the real impact wasn't in the statements. It was in the way everyone inside and outside the company began pronouncing my name with a mix of respect and caution. The kind of tone reserved for those who survived a fire and returned with matches in their pocket. On the way out of the court, Jonathan shook my hand. "You did it, Ethan. Justice served." "Not just justice, John. Poetic." At 10:02 a.m., I looked at the Austin sky. Blue, translucent. I picked up the Montrose pen, twirled it between my fingers, and realized something I always knew. That pen wasn't a symbol of power.
It was a reminder that no signature is stronger than the memory of who made it. Because in a world where power and reputation are synonyms, true victory isn't in defeating an enemy. It's in making him remember every day who defeated him. The news spread like a spark in dry straw. In 5 days, Horizon Dynamics saw what I already knew it would see: external audits, 5 internal investigations, 2 state regulatory inquiries, and a class action lawsuit initiated by clients demanding transparency. On September 24, 2025, the State Compliance Department announced an administrative fine of $2.1 million for documentary obstruction practices and contractual clause violations. Fulton Utilities suspended payments until judicial resolution. The exchange recorded a 9.7% drop in Horizon shares over 3 business days. Cold numbers, but with enough heat for executives to start exchanging cards like they were lifeboat tickets. Gregory Vance disappeared from the company website even before the official board statement. Megan Halbrook resigned on September 27th, citing irreconcilable management differences. Eric Nolan, whose name appeared in several dubious messages, was placed on administrative leave. The sector press did the job I didn't want: turned facts into narrative. But I wasn't seeking media revenge out of vanity. I sought consequences proportional to the acts.
While the public lens did its work, my name went from a whisper to a firm title. I received consulting proposals, invitations to speak at conferences, and, curiously, a call from a small social impact fund that wanted to invest in a governance structure I could lead. In 3 weeks, I already had 3 concrete proposals, one offering a $450,000 contract to found an independent compliance hub dedicated to energy and infrastructure. I accepted the one requiring less pomp and more results. However, my rise wasn't made of spotlights. There was a silent movement: clients who sought me out privately again, mayors who requested consulting to avoid the same disaster, and a group of former colleagues who began seeing me not as the man who left the frame, but as the map that would guide them out of the storm. I started over with a small room in Austin, a sturdy desk, and the Montrose pen inside a wooden box I received from a friend. The pen, now polished, sat on the desk as a trophy, not of hate, but of memory. Horizon didn't break immediately. Large companies rarely break from a single scandal. They corrode in cycles. But the damage was visible: lost contract, shaken credibility, reconstituted board with external names, and a projected revenue drop of $12 million for the next fiscal year. Klein & Partners was called for a deep audit and recommended total governance change. That generated a cascade effect. Clients dependent on stability migrated to competitors. Justice, therefore, didn't come just from the court. It came from bank accounts, reparation letters, and contracts that evaporated. In my case, victory had 2 layers: the public one, certified in sentence and fine, and the private one, the slow and silent construction of something I always wanted to build, with principles, not just spreadsheets. I set up a consultancy with Jonathan and Marcus as technical partners, an office that combined law, digital forensics, and governance. We weren't big, we were right. And that, in the right market, is worth more than inflated titles. On an October afternoon, I sat alone in the new office, opened the wooden box, and took out the Montrose pen. I looked at it and smiled with the same calm I had in court. The pen had started as a father's gift, became an instrument of contract, and finally, of reparation. I put it in my coat pocket and went out to a meeting with a Texas mayor who wanted to protect her city. As I crossed the street, I thought about the strangeness of life. The same hand that once signed silence orders would now sign transparency policies. I closed this story with a maxim I learned from the white lines of contracts and the blue edges of the pen. Signatures are printed promises. Memory is the ink that keeps them alive.